Welcome to the blossoming garden of harmonic progressions and voice leadings, of subtle and beautiful common tones, opposite directions as well for contrary motions. The beauty as a mathematic formula can be also of the step motion, of the effect of the movement of different voices like well-behaved people in society. It's an idealized world, but you know what? It's incredibly true that for centuries the harmonic progressions within the tonal system gave the room and the space and the freedom and the inspiration to be tailored, to be part of every musician's different time periods life, and to be the tools of expression like a gardener gardening harvesting specific plants with specific vegetables or specific nutritional or healing plants. I find that there is a dimension of healing in harmonic progressions. It's like non-applied science, it's just for the purpose of itself. The beautiful voice leading of the layered contrapuntal harmonic, simple in appearance, but really profoundly meaningful groove tracks that make the harmonic progressions of the tonal system customized by some or universally used by others through centuries to express themselves with their individuality. But what is the communality is the cadential progression of the voice leading of the chords in society. So a major chord in major tonality, a major chord in minor, harmonic, melodic, ascending or descending. It's not only the chord by itself, it's the chord in society, in the hierarchy of the dominant, as its name speaks about, its place hierarchically, and then the tonic and the subdominant melodically under the dominant, when in the circle of fifths is the equivalent of the dominant compared to rather than. But in the scale with the two tetrachords, we have in singing spaces of step motion, the 7 perfect fifths. Do, ré, mi, fa, sol, la, si. Fa, do, sol, ré, la, mi, si. Now, what is beautiful about the gestures of the voicings is that if you take a 4 parts display of the root in the melodic bass, subdominant, dominant, tonic. It's the punctuation. It's the assessment that we are where we are. Because of the leading tone, because of the dominant, possibly if you add a fourth, third to become a seventh, beyond the triad of the fifth, you have the seventh going to the third in resolution, creating a tritone that is the interval that the ancient called the devil in music, because it was an intervals on which you couldn't rest or meditate or feel like you don't have to belong musically but to, like Gregorian chants, to God's messages through the verses, not happy or sad, not their own involvement in emotional, psychological, major or minor, but parallel perfect intervals like the fifth or the fourth, which is the inversion, but is not nor or in between minor, major, tear with a smile. But to go back to our program of moving melodic bass line of roots of the tonic, the subdominant, of the dominant, and the tonic. So if you take the redisposition that we just did, tenor on the E3rd, alto on the 5th, and soprano on the unison or octave, in this case 15, but just one octave above the octave. I didn't mean to scare you. Sol, la, sol, sol, mi, fa, re, mi. The tenor goes where, and then you have the alto, G. Its leading tone B, but the G is the common tone with the dominant as well as in the tonic. So this is the meaning of harvesting your garden with harmonic progressions that have subtle communal notes or most possible step motion. Mi, fa, re, mi, sol, la, sol, sol, do, do, si, do, sol, la, sol, sol, mi, fa, re, mi, sol, la, sol, sol, do, si, do, fa, re, mi, do, sol, sol, do, si, do. The different layers. They sound almost like a melodic list of notes, and in fact they're superimposed. Oh yes, it's easy to think on each bass note some kind of root position triad, like in pop music or in rock. 3 chords. The 3 triads in major, and that means the major triads are on 1 as a degree, 4 subdominant as a degree, and 5 dominant as a degree. In order to place them in the societal situation of their harmonic progression, which is exactly what the blossoming or the harvesting of the garden is, the gardener of harmony. Especially when you hold the common tone instead of repeating it. So this way, oh, is a tonic, becomes the 5th, leading tone, tonic. Okay, I know. Singing it belittles the point I want to make because I'm not a singer. But what I wanted to mention through that is an example for you, is that if you don't put it in your mouth, literally chew, sing, swallow, one of the voices has to be expressed other than by the fingers of the pianist in order to avoid that superimposition of vertical chords, but literally have the layers of each of the progressions melodic line. So if you sing one or speak one while you play 2 others, or the middle one, or the bottom one, it seems simple and easy like this when I give it as an example, but I realize that it's very difficult for most pianists to learn that after they've learned the skills of how to play so many complex harmonizations. Secondary dominance in Chopin, fourth ballade, or many places. Of course, the pianist we work on the Chopin etudes for the finger motion, the gymnastics, the lightness, the independence of the different length of fingers for the different topography of the terrain, with one black key in F major like this etude, common with practicing the equivalent of etudes, which would be for harmonic tonal system, the cadences in their simple but pure beauty. And if you are to add the dominant seventh, you don't have to do 4 and 5, you do it all in one. Since you incorporate the subdominant in the dominant seventh, the F, creating the tritone tension release. So you can do, or establishing the tonic on the tonic. Because in fact C major is the triad. It gives the name to the key, C major. But what defines it is the dominant with the leading tone and eventually the seventh as a tritone, creating that ultimate pressure, tension, attraction towards a resolution. And that's the general perfect punctuation or perfect cadence. And it's important for a pianist, especially who has usually, as I say, this agility of the fingers. But you know what? Even in those etudes by Chopin, which are necessarily not harmonic progression exercises, in order to harmonize a figured bass with beautiful voice leadings, without parallel fifths, without attacks of octave in direction. In other words, with the basic rules that bring you by their forbidden moves to search for creative contrary motions and detect all the common tones possible. In other words, obtain a melodic line which emanates from the harmonic progression, just like the 3 parts mostly of the time, because of the dubbing of the 4th part becoming a problem. Who do we dub in triads? The 5th or the leading tone? Of course you don't want to dub the leading tone because then you have parallels. But the point is that when you do the study of the continuo figured bass, you harmonize on each note of the bass line, melodic as it be, and some of them harmonic in the terms of roots, and not the rest are the inversions. So the quality of the voice leading is that it's researched, it's understood, is digested through years of writing 4 parts, figuring out how the best move, like on a chessboard, the moves of the different pawns. You visualize the game before you've played it or while playing several of them. So then you have different dispositions, more spread SATB versus bunched, or and I know that repetitively sounds so obvious when you hear me play, like, oh, what's he doing? It's like the first Gymnopédie by Satie. So it's not exactly the complexity that makes it beautiful, is the simplicity that makes it poetic. And the lack of desire to combine more complications, which is the art of embellishing or even in building a sense that beauty is carved, shaped material. When Debussy orchestrates the first Gymnopédie, he adds an arpeggio of the harp. Of course, Satie could have done that on the piano too. But the beauty in Satie is the simplicity, naivete, or the style of, compared to a more complex voice-led 4-part like Birds Ave Vera. suspensions, then the same banal, apparently so, perfect cadence in major here because of the piece in minor. The seventh being flat for descending minor compared to the leading tone for the harmonic minor. And with the suspensions, you delay the arrival on the tonic for the punctuation or the ending. You would do. But that's very shortcutted. Okay, that's a shortcut. Everything is ultimately a cadence to end the piece, either in a weaker cadence or because of the lack of leading tone, unless you add it on top of the so-called plagal subdominant tonic, which would be sort of a hybrid subdominant tonic plagal cadence with 7th degree leading tone, playing at the same time as the tonic and cleaving up in the unison. But if not, or compared to so as a pianist, you have to think about these things because the composers whom you play, they thought that because they learned it. All of them were taught either on the organ, either theoretically to write 4 parts, harmonization, realization of the voice leadings, not just the harmonizations of the degrees. And so you organize this harvesting of beautiful lines on your garden for this and for that type of vegetable, or for this or that type of flower, and for it's the same analogy with harmonization, because it brings you the food, the ingredients, the nutrients for your melodic, and then of course through harmony expression. But in a theoretized practicing, this is a perfect cadence in 4 parts. Tenor, E, F, D, E, G, A, G common for the alto, and C common for the tonic and subdominant, B leading tone, C. And the more you repeat it, the more you gain access to macerate inside the leaves of all these beautiful connected, superimposed layers rather than harmonized chords. They are harmonizations through melodization of the layered voices. So if the tonic C major is the major triad in society major tonality, then the 4th degree is the next one, subdominant, and through dominant back to the tonic with a perfect cadence. Then the dominant, the 5th degree, is the 3rd major triad in the society of the major key. So you can do this elaborate solution with appealing to the so-called deceptive 5/6 that has all what the perfect does with the leading tone, except that the bass line deceptively goes to the A minor 6th degree, which has common tone with the tonic, 2 of them, the C and the E, compared to the dominant that had only the G. This is a 1 common tone with a tonic. Then you have, and you want to avoid the parallelism, because then you create a better quality, researched, carved, shaped, cultivated voice leading that gives you satisfaction, regardless if it's heard or blend in the orchestra if you play on a harpsichord, because you hear it, you shape it, you make it. It's not all written. It's suggested by the harmonization, but it's up to you to find a beautiful harmonization. It's exactly what I thought in the analogy of the gardener could be the analogy of a chef making a sauce, the ingredients and the proportions. So here, by searching contrary motion, we do re, do, re, mi. For the tenor, sol, mi, la, sol. For the alto, si, do, si. The leading tone to the tonic on the top. And if you have a different disposition, then it would be, it will become. And you know, the point of the disposition is something that you realize very often when you study music by Chopin, Schumann, Brahms, Beethoven. Though of these four, I would say Schumann is the one for pianistic writing who spreads the most in the string quartet or choral SATB. The coda of the first movement of his Fantasy Opus 17 is really a harmonic progression, almost as an exercise with the perfect cadence, and the disposition is not bunched and the bass far away, but rather combined in the same spacing under octave between the tenor octave, bass, and the alto and soprano. So you have, compared to, or you bunch it down, you bunch it up, but in any case you create a gap in between. And Schumann insists often, even if it's very large, to play the tonic with the 10th rather than the 3rd, in order to have then the 5th is a 12th. You have this desire for balanced dispositions of the harmonies, but with a voice leading way of shelving the harmonization with equal distant shelvings, and not one and then three bunched on the top. You have to think vertical while you play horizontal. Any pianist who looks at the music score for piano first figures out how to fit the two hands together. So verticality wins at the get-go. And then you're told, but careful, think polyphonically, think layered voicing. Then you have to retro a pedal and go back to the first moment you played the piece and try to understand. And you start tasting each fruit of each layer, and then this leading tone and this common tone to the 2 with a C, and then the raised second degree, not like the beginning. So you rise the second degree, and you feel it only when you hear it alone, before you put it in combination with the others. But you have to first taste it and compare it to the natural second degree in C major and the D sharp, the reason. Of course, you can say, and mostly do, it's a given, it's a fact, it's obvious, it's self-evident. Why are you insisting on such obvious facts? Sky is blue, the grass is green. Okay, fine. I'll be my own devil's advocate this way by saying it. Not that everybody thinks like that, because they're very refined thinking, hearing capacity of students, regardless if they have or not the perfect pitch. That's a completely different pattern of thoughts. But let's say that you don't, or you have harmonic at best relative intervals pitch that discerns the spaces between a 5th or a 4th, a 3rd or a 6th, a 2nd or a 7th, of course a unison or an octave. And so these spacings you appreciate because of the display, and also because this way you can hear in different ranges spread enough to be heard together combined as they're meant to, while they are also individual. So if you think and learn and study, memorize finger phrase, organize direction of the line and the legato, I don't want to say, as I don't intend it either, as a teacher that is all reduced to the theory and then it goes in practice and becomes a masterpiece. But I still think that you hear, when a performer hears the voices while combined, layered, or heard before learning how to place the fingers, because you're not going to sing, thankfully, in front of the audience. Even if it's based by Schumann as a homage, to Beethoven's Ferne Geliebte song, the distant beloved, translated not very literally in English, rather the distant beloved. But the point is, bunched or spread? I still believe that in order to play any piece, you have to reach the level of subtle, combined, layered, complex, chromatic, contrapuntal, independent voices, like independent fingers through the Etudes of Chopin, in the writing of the harmonic progressions. And therefore you hear them layered in this piece. And you can do layerings in every piece, as a matter of fact. And it really is important. It's almost like as if you're so curious to know how this watch works that you take it apart and rebuild it for the pleasure of the curiosity, which is at the root of the humankind. Really, curiosity in the best sense of the word, make you discover how things function and why. Not that you always find the answers, that less in astronomy, but in tonal harmony it's more simplified. But the beauty of the motion of the voices as well-behaved citizens in an idealized society, I find that very appealing. And so tonic, subdominant, dominant through the 6th degree of the deceptive, and finally perfect cadence would be the 3 major triads in major key, and you can do it in G major or in F or in D flat or in D flat, or just do it through the circle of fifths going up. Also name them and call C major, G major, and then D major, A major, because of the tetrachord. C major has a bottom and top tetrachord built equally, symmetrically. Ton-ton, semiton, ton-ton, semiton. The top of the C major becomes with the added F sharp to obtain ton-ton, semiton, therefore the leading tone. G major, after the single F sharp, now 2 for D major, 3 of which the third of the sharps is the leading tone of A major. Then the top A major tetrachord becoming the bottom E major tetrachord. We have the 4 sharps, F, G, and C, and D. B major with the 5 sharps, the pentatonic. Okay, so what you do is that you can modulate, transpose, and that is important not to confuse. A harmonic progression in another key. D major, A major in the circle of fifths going up, or in the circle of fifths going down, and then therefore you will do F major and B flat major. allowed to go further than E flat major, because after it's A flat, I don't have it. But that's not important. The importance is to be able to play the harmonic progression, be it simple as it is, or apparently so, by thinking the functions, hearing innerly the voice-led movements, as well as the intervals progression, separating the melodic line of the bass from the harmonization, 3 parts, tenor, alto, soprano. And the fact that you reproduce them not only in different tonalities and not only by ear, but by function of leading tone, subdominant, tonic. Then, in fact, you approach pianistically, literally on the keyboard, the different topography of the terrain with 1 black key in G major, 2 in D major, 3 in A major, and so forth, or in flats, 1 in B, F flat, 2 in B flat, 3 in E flat, 4 flats in A flat. And each time you play different combination on the keys. So even if you hear the same intervals or the same patterns of individual voices, as I sang it in C major, I can sing it in A flat major. La, sol, la, mi, fa, mi, do, re, si. You know, obviously voice is not my forte, so I'm doing it for demonstration, but I just failed. My voice didn't come out. Do, re, si, do, mi, fa, mi, la, sol, la. You can practice these in the intimacy of your own practicing. In singing, solfeging or la-laing, hopefully more solfeging, but if not, even with English texts, A, G, A, instead of la, sol, la, or ta, 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 or la, 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 whichever, but one of the voices has to be verbalized when the 3 others play the notes, and not always the same. Like the middle voice, E, F, E, and then the tenor C, D flat, C. Once you integrate these harmonic progressions in a sort of a matrix of your knowledge of harmonic progressions, you recognize them differently presented, altered, in a ways that you barely recognize them, but they are there. In the opening of the Valse Noble et Sentimentale by Ravel, he does a complete circle of fifths in the bass with harmonizations of major 9s. Oh, you can learn them note by note, or you can learn them as a progression. Form of practicing it before to be in a piece, or you find it in a piece applied by the composer, the pure knowledge of it, which is to use it as an unapplied sign, just for the beauty of the moving chromatic scale notes. For instance, your left hand goes chromatically, and you practice a system of reproductive patterns, well, sequence, for the other voices. So if you have, what happens is that if you have a diminished 7th, minor 7th, dominant 7 in F major, and then chromatically you reach 3 notes to go to the 6th degree, 3 to go to sharp 4, and 3 to go to flat 3. So if you follow the melodic line in exponential chromatic direction, opposite direction, that means that the 7th as an interval went to the 3rd, to the next arrival point in the bass line. At that point you have a secondary voice which was common, the G, that becomes at the moment of reaching the A in the bass, the seventh, which in turn will chromatically arrive to the next arrival point, where then the first note, which was E, waiting its turn as the tenor did, then the tenor also goes from the seventh to the third, as the seventh in the soprano went to the third, and the seventh of the alto went to the third. And so then with the passing tones, chromatically, you can hear if you don't repeat the common tones, then you obtain, and because of the decay, you don't hear the connection between the long-held tenor on 2 bars, finally moving in its turn after the alto did, or the rather, that's what I meant. So on the piano, you don't hear the connection between the long held and the moving notes that follow it, because in a way you have to restrike it. If not, with the decay you lose it. To make it evident, directly demonstrative, or then you hold it by having played it louder in the beginning as a seventh, going to the third. So the fifth would have been louder, so it can go with a decay to the chromatic movement after it, as well as the tenor. And pick up the long note at its lowest quasi-decay of the sound. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, and not, but follow in the decay of the sound, and then play so soft in the level on which the decay has happened in the long held sound, and then you pick it up and then re-rise. I don't have to do too much of these roller coasters, but it does help to follow this way, so you give the illusion to the listener, like when you apply it in a Bach fugue like C sharp minor book 1, that you don't have a decay of the sound, because you pick it up where it has dropped and then you re-rise it immediately in the faster motions, like here in the contra subject. Naturally, in your hearing, in your ear, and your musicianship, you don't hear the decay, because this is a sort of a liturgical fugue with long voices, like Book 2 E major. Mi, fa, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, re, si, mi, fa, sol, la, si, fa, si, la. And in this case, for the C sharp minor, sol, fa, double sharp, si, la sharp, sol sharp, A natural, G sharp, F sharp, G sharp, C sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A, B. It's easier for me in solfeging, because that's how I learned when I was young. But regardless how you call it, what's regarding most importantly is to follow the flow, decay or not, compared to the voice-led SATB choir that doesn't decay, vibrato sustains. The sound here on the long values decay, so you have to take it in account by following each of the layers for themselves after having moved already in the middle voice. And you add the bass. And you work on a legato. And then you return. You would not find it in this pure version, theoretically so, applied in the music pieces. You would have something like in Schumann codas. So it would be part of an expression. It might be a bridge, it might be a connector, it might be a modulation, because some of them modulate, obviously. Practicing of the cadence of the simple first example module of the perfect cadence makes you practice to reproducing the pattern. The equivalent of, I think, scales for pianists would be the practicing of keyboard harmonists, if that's a title of a performer, to be the sequences that reproduce the patterns on different tonalities and therefore pianistically on different topographies. And so you have some of the sequences that don't modulate, they just go for each degree according to the fingering, which reflects the figuring, the figured bass, all sixth chords. You stay within C major. Of course you can, as I said earlier, for the cadences, you can do it in another key. And while it sounds similar to the ear because of the intervals, it displays differently in each tonality. For the fingerings. And so practicing the sequences, reproducing a pattern and following the voice-led linear voices of it makes you practice your thinking. It makes you become a better hearing pianist before performing. Therefore, you'll perform more of the inner voices juices that you have been able to capture or layer or to organize and taste individually and not lose their taste once they're bunched together. Of course, you can use also the intonation of C major, since in piano we don't tune, well, except the tuners obviously. But if you want to not only transpose literally the pattern and its reproduction, rather use modulation practice, in which case you work on the functions rather than on the intervals. And I mean the tonic, the subdominant, the dominant, and the tonic, even if it's a fifth for the cadence, and the subdominant, the fourth, for the move to the subdominant fourth degree, fifth degree, first degree. But if you always start on the same chord, C major, but not as a tonic in C major, but as the fourth degree in G major, or the fifth degree of F major. Oh, I know that I play too fast and I give examples too flowingly, and it all seems so natural flowing, and you wonder, why is it so complex if it sounds so obvious? Well, try, and you'll see that it is not about the ear, though it helps to have one in music, as an intuitive guide through the fog of the complexities of what the composers heard in order to compose the piece. And we have to rise to their level of hearing before we rise to the level of their finger writing. And then that is part of the teaching for a pianist, of course. The fingerings, the phrasing, the pedaling, the tempo, the articulation, the dynamic range, the layered sounds, the quality of the legato, and then the direction of the line, the pedaling, the substitutions if you need to create a sense of extra fingers for connected sounds when holding another sound without to overwhelm it with the pedal and blur it rather. Okay, that is the fingers aspect, but now the thinking aspect is if I did 1, 4, 5, 1, and if this is 4, C major triad, not in C major key. C major as a triad becoming then the subdominant for the perfect cadence in G major, starting with C major as a 4th degree subdominant. And if C major, instead of being the 5th degree in C major, is the dominant as G major, if the same chord becomes functionally the dominant, then we go in F major. So you can do, or in modulation rather than in transposition, which I just demonstrated. I'll play it slower. In fact, you always have to think in the harmonic progression from the first chord to the last chord through the degrees that you're going to go. Then the dispositions matter, as well as the individual voice leading, avoidance of parallelisms in order to do beautifully creative. In fact, it obliges you to search as a good sculptor to shape the original material into a voice-led, beautifully performed legato combined. And you hear it not only as sounds that are written on a score, or you hear it as a function because of the subdominant, dominant, and tonic, but then each of these chords can be the dominant or subdominant or the tonic of its own different key. And then if you take the C major as a obviously dominant, you get to go to F major. So the degree function of the single same chord compared to changing chords within the degrees of the key. These are aspects which are not so obvious unless you write them down, but to imagine in your hearing and your visualization with the inner eyes of what is the harmonic progression. How do we do that in a civilized matter through the tonality or tonalities? Because then you have some of the sequences that inevitably modulate. Every time you arrive at another tonality, instead of keeping it in C major, in the natural degrees of C major, instead of modulating. So you can have sequences that modulate or stay in the key, reproducing patterns on different tonalities, which represent different displays of the keyboard's topography. And you follow these voices as you follow the harmonic progression from within side, like playing the viola, second violin in a quartet. It is true that learning to discern this in the hearing level before even the playing level, let alone the practicing level where you play some and sing some hybrid like, that gives you a sense of freeing from the fact that you are not only obliged to play like you read them aligned on top of each other. Is a matter of fact, when you look at Bach's manuscripts, photocopies, obviously the reproductions of the facsimiles, as they call them, right? You can see that Bach writes a stem for each note on a chord, but individually. Like if he does the opening second partita, they're not a group of notes organized by shelvings because they are the harmonization of the tonic, 7 on top of the tonic and 1. But in fact, in the notation, they have their own individual stem for each tonic, 3rd, 5th, or root. It doesn't mean much when you hear it in terms of the fact that either you arpeggiate to display them individually, like they release their perfume of the third, of the fifth, of the root, of the tonic, of the dubbing, of the this. So you have a bit more time to absorb than if you just played that, or the first note of the Valse Noble by Ravel, which in fact is the version of his clustered, so to say. And if you're doing the Schumann Fantasy, but you don't play like that on the piano because you pluck it. As Beethoven does in the Pathétique, and Bach in the same C minor as the Beethoven's later Pathétique, second partita in Bach. Yes, they are inevitably played together, regardless if they are arpeggiated less, not too much to imitate, or not an instrument or another, like harpsichord on the piano. But that is on the surface of the facts. The meaning of that is that you have a consonance, a dissonance, and a tonic. Again, reconsonance, tension, release, and tension and release. And when you hear them all together, it's because you read them together on the score and you align them. And you have a vague idea in your unpracticed ear to hear the voices rather than the bunching of the voices. I think that is what keyboard harmony teaches you to yearn for with your ear when you play complex or simple chordal or polyphonic writing of any kind. Well-tempered clavier or modern music until the tonal system is abolished, obviously for some, but until then you can. In Schubert, in Schumann, in Liszt, in Mozart, in Debussy, in Rachmaninoff, and so many. But the point of all my demonstration is that if you become virtuoso at voice-led cadential practices, for instance in major, 1, 4, 5, 1, 4, 5, 1, for the degrees of the bass line, 5, 6, 4, 5, 1. I established 1 and 5 and 4, 2, because they're the three major triad in C major, because 2, 3, 6 are minor. And then the seventh is the famous diminished seventh, the tritone, creating the tension release that brings the dominant to go to the tonic. So this is the system for each tonality. And the fact that if you think, how will I do now if I have 2, 3, 6 as minor triads compared to 1, 4, 5, which were the major triads for the degrees, then I'll have to play I start from the second degree, minor, D minor in C major as a chord, and perhaps, and if I do go from the third degree, I have a cadence going always back to the perfect cadence, ending in the tonic, but I start from the degree, in this case the second, or the third, or the sixth. So you started from 1, 4, and 5 in major triads, major keys, minor triads 2, 3, 6 in major keys, 7 being diminished, and in minor the third degree being augmented, or but you have 1 augmented, 1 diminished, but the rest are perfect, major or minor. So when you synthesize these harmonic progressions, individual chords, then in voicing organized by beautiful common tones and contrary motions, you get to the understanding the theory of the grammar of the tonal system's hierarchy of degrees with their own harmonizations, which become melodized when you play them as a sequence of chords rather than packages of chords. And you realize that in many pieces of music, it's raw or complex in the way with the suspensions to delay the resolution, so you don't hear it so evidently. For instance, the beginning of Waldstein, you hear it very evidently. 4-5-1 in G major, 4-5-1 in F major, the subdominant. So he demonstrates in the opening of the sonata who is his dominant, who is subdominant in his C major sonata, and finally the dominant. Sorry. Well, he uses major, minor, minor, major. It's interesting to observe if you can when you do, but it's difficult unless you practice first at the base level the harmonic progressions as a fingering motion and awareness of each tonality, reproducing patterns to the functions of the chords. That you could, in a complex way, that you play a Schumann sonata, a Fauré, a Franck, Prelude and Fugue, and chorale and all, whichever genre style of the composer who used the tonal system but customized it, you could reduce it to a harmonic progression. Does it mind? Does it matter? Is it heard? I think it is. The way you move your voices in the expression of their gestures in terms of their eloquence shows how much you're immersed in the grammar of the expression. And then it becomes an expression of musical uplifting, what only music as a language expresses by itself, but then you can adjust it and constantly connect it to the human nature experience. So it is true that if you can, and you do, play a piece of music that doesn't seem to be a harmonic progression exercise, you don't have to reduce it to, but it helps you with memorization to figure out the pattern of the movements of the lines, and therefore the bass line mainly, even if not and far from there always in root position. So it's not so evident, but it's embedded. So you see it because you've practiced it on its own in theory, and then you see it in its application by the composer, and you go, wow, that's amazing, it's exactly what I was practicing. Just like when you practice as a pianist to practice C major scale, and you play the return of the recap of the first movement of Waldstein, you go, oh wow, I'm practicing my scale, but in the piece. Or I am applying my knowledge of practicing of scales in the piece, not that they're always there, like Mozart's third movement of the C minor concerto. Sorry for the model ending. But the point was the exercise of scales in the left hand in the variation. And according to the Gazette of Vienna, when Mozart premiered it in one of those Sunday subscription afternoon concerts on the fortepiano, conducting from it his unfinished score because he improvised his part, but freshly copied part for the orchestra musicians, Beethoven stood up and said, I didn't come here to hear how Mozart practiced his scales. And of course, in his opening third concerto, a few years later, the piano enters charismatically with a C minor scale. So yes, sometimes you find those scales displayed as such. And sometimes they're part in one hand or part in another, part of more complex texture. But it's beautiful in the sense, again, of a beauty of the mathematical equation, is that besides its logic, or because of its logic, the pure beauty of the thinking brings you to like thinking like that, and you develop an abstract thought and a sense of aesthetics of the abstract thoughts. Perhaps a beautiful chess movement in a game brings you the same fulfillment as a sculptor sculpting the raw material. It's all about what we do with the materials and how, with our human added value, we organize the chaos of nature, regardless if it's, well, sometimes the time periods sound so dated that people say, that's modern or that's old fashioned or this is avant garde. We are ahead. I don't know who's ahead and who's behind, because when I play Brahms and Chopin and Schumann and Bartok and Prokofiev and whoever, teaching or performing or recording. Do I detect everywhere everything? Most likely yes, because I'm trained to. Does it mean I played better because I understand it? Most likely not to, because to play you have to have the industry of the fingers in the pianism. But if you can dub it with the harmonic knowledge of everything going on, you should not even have a problem with the memorization, because you don't relate only on finger memory or only on ear memory for all intervals if it were to be the relative pitch. It's a combination of things. You have the memory of the visual, the memory of the heard, the memory of the understood, and then you combine all these together and you play the piece and you're aware of what's happening where you are. It's like having a GPS in real time constantly telling you, oh, you're almost in C sharp, but with a common tone you could be in A major anytime now, all of a sudden, and return back from the B section. So you are navigating, that's the word that I think probably corresponds best. You're navigating the composer's hearing thought process ahead, because obviously he came up with the piece before you played, mostly centuries before. And so you play already what is the result of a beginning and an ending that is defined. You go just through the, it was a maze, I was going to say, but not all scores are a maze, but you go through a certain pattern of paths. You memorize them, you perform them, then you add the expression on top of it if you didn't already feel it, because of the tension release, major, minor, or subtle combinations of both. And then the mood, if it's clearly saw by the title or by the orchestration, if it's with orchestra. In many aspects, the piano is the instrument that the least dictates you how to play it, compared to another instrument that has to change bow or you have to breathe. But that at the same time we need, as pianists, to find a punctuation even near artificial, because we don't run out of breath since we don't breathe and therefore exhale while playing. But in a way musically we do, because it's written in that sense of the harmonic progression of the melodic lines, which are so beautifully contoured and expressively demonstrated in the orchestration or the singing or the choir, and you hear it as a combination while you at the same time hear the individual parts. If you can listen to a two viola Mozart quintet rather, and follow the beauty of the inner voices with their elegance of the gestures, with their nobility of not just fulfilling chordal common tones. It's simple, but it's not simplistic. It's complex, but it's not overwhelming. It's just serving aesthetically a purpose, organizing voices, but with inner voices being beautiful as much as the melodic, which most of the trained ears hear on the top more obviously. So that you follow a second viola, or just in a quartet a single viola of a quartet without a score, that demands a very important attuning capacity. If not, you receive the magma of sounds and you try to deal with them. They're pleasant, unpleasant, cold, warm, sad, happy, whatever kind of analogy. Of course, when you hear the beginning of the Funeral March by Chopin, by the harmonization and the pattern of the first degree and the sixth degree in alternation, you feel the procession's steps. Now, that he really want that? Could that have been as expressive? pianist was doing a scale rather than alternating, oscillating between 1 and 6 with inversion. But it gives the impression of steps, I think. I'm sure everybody thinks it's not a great discovery. But what is interesting is to be able to play it alternatively, to convince yourself of how meaningful it is the way it is. Not to think, oh, my alternative is worth 2, because that's a problem of ego. You have to be free thinker outside of the box while remaining humble in front of the texture of the writing of the composer. That's why I think beyond reciting the texture, notation, intent of the composer through the publishers and the recordings of other people, is to capture in your practicing through the harmonic progressions the spiritual motion of the piece. What is its inner engine that makes it so attachingly bittersweet or very happy or sweet? For instance, when Chopin plays the introduction of the end of first ballade and introduces the theme, harmonized with 1, 4, 2, 5, 1 in G minor, he has this suspended 6/4, which most 19th century publishers fixed Chopin's wandering, beautifully dissonant, hanging there, unresolved apparently until. But you don't hear it unless you see it. And then if you hear it while you have seen it, how much will you play it? Will you do? Because that is too evident. And the people say, well, you're not playing the notes. In fact, it's because we don't follow the resolution of the 9/8, the E flat to the D, and therefore we stay suspended as Chopin let us stay suspended in our expectation. So this kind of delay tactics between the, let's say, basic deceptive cadence, it's already delay tactics. Instead of, and here instead of, he goes. And if you reduce it to the harmonic progression, then you go. First ballade, because you're going to relative major, and then you can do that and you say, okay, then first ballade, first page, I have subdominant tonic, and I go relative major, B flat, flat 7, return to. Yeah, that doesn't really characterize the piece. It's just the inner lining, right? But it's there. I think the awareness of it being there, not hearing it or demonstratively demonstrating it, because after all, Chopin is the melody harmonized. 5/5, 5/3, relative major. Have diminished 7th of second degree through the 5th. Does it mean that when I play, for instance, I hear these harmonic progressions more the beauty of the melody harmonized by these perfume of harmonizations, a little bit of this augmented, a little bit of this minor, a little bit of this major? Chopin is the alchemist. He makes the beautiful combinations. We just display them. When Bach writes the first prelude, there is no melody, or if any, is the emanation of the harmonic arpeggiation of the root fingered, if it was figured at the time, bass line and harmonic progression of the first prelude of Well-Tempered Clavier Book 1. bit reductive, isn't it? But it's the GPS of the main pattern through which you go in this path from the beginning to the end, establishing what the prelude did before the fugue, the tonality. And therefore you establish the tonic, the subdominant or the second degree, and then you go to the dominant, and then you try some sequences. Basically, you attune the hearing of the listener into the key in which you'll display your fugue. And this is well for complex tonalities in which before the well-tempered tuning for the intervals of the unison versus the thirds, which was out of tune for them, it's in tune for us today, but it allows you then to play through the unisons in every key, even the least used, like F sharp minor. Or E flat minor. And you have the harmonization. 1, 4, 5, 1 on C minor. It's 1, 4, 5, or 7, 1. In other words, I would like to say that practicing the harmonic progressions in sequences or cadences, singing voices, modulating or transposing, and both, allows you to develop your thinking to enlarge your horizons, so that when you play a piece, regardless how much of it is fueled or driven by a harmonic progression, disguised or displayed, some more or less, more that, more or less, less more. But the point is that you feel like, I recognize you. I've seen you in this other series, Mr. Actor. I've seen you do the deceptive ending in Mozart's K310. And I'm doing in the same key something else in another piece. Could it be by Franck? And of course, I don't confuse the genres, the styles, the composers, the expression, the time periods, the socio-economic development of the industry for the instrument, and the development of the halls and hearing and projecting length of sound. And in other words, going from the virtuosity of the polyphony for the voice leading to the virtuosity of the fingers, to the virtuosity being the velocity of the fingers on the keys, as I said. But you don't use this etude by Chopin to do the progression, or the first etude, which Chopin models to the Bach first prelude. So you could use almost the harmonizations of Bach with their pages of Chopin. Well, he didn't use Bach's patterns, he used his own, but they're very similar in C major. He does 4, raised 4, so Chopin was looking back to Bach. Beethoven looks back to Bach in the variations of Opus 109 with the variations of Goldberg. Some of the composers also looked ahead and decided to break some of these rules, like Beethoven, like Liszt late in his life, and of course Schoenberg and onwards. People who receive and cherish not that much a tradition because they don't feel they can express themselves with those tools. It's like almost a jacket that's too tight for them to wear. And what's the point if they cannot express themselves other than by breaking some of the rules in order to become their personal, as I said earlier, customization of the tonal system, or then really impactfully get rid of it and reimagine a different order of notes, which were the series. But before you embark in that onwards, you have so many, at least 3 centuries, if not more, of classical so-called music written by different composers in different time periods. Have so little in common that they're not really classical, but we call it so today in order to differentiate it from pop. But nevertheless, all the styles create their own expression through the common language that is the harmonic language. So it gives you a universality of the exposure of the tension release of the major or the minor, if you're more formal or more expressive outside of the form for the moods. You can use in it, you can take from it, and you can enhance it the way you wish it in order to express what somehow digs in deep you to get out of you, because that's what the creator does. He digs out something perhaps remotely heard in another life or the one's own dreams, and you extract it, and then you organize it and you display it, and it ends up being Schumann offering us the coda, not nor, but, and that is to be cherished. And I think that even if they died young compared to us, for most of the composers whom we play, they didn't have time to go through endless courses of harmonic progressions, of contrapoint and fugue. They probably learned it in the style of the day for the usage of the time, more like explanation booklet how to play a game, rather than a treatise to organize the thinking of the whole tonal system. Like, if you practice on learning everything about the moon, you don't have to learn everything about directly, but rather indirectly about other planets, whatever, for whatever this analogy is worth. I still think that, and believe, not think, I'm convinced that practicing keyboard harmony through cadences and sequences enhances your awareness of what you play. Regardless what it is, play or hear actually. You don't always have to play to hear it. Of course, tip of fingers are memory, but singing, voicing, hearing, just listening, but attentively, with or without the score. With the score, you make it for what you cannot hear with what you can see. Or sometimes you hear what you see and you don't hear it when it's played, and then you want to bring it when you play it, because you think, why didn't they bring? Or they being the others. Or none. Just the beauty of correspondence between voices. Played slowly, legato like this, you can appreciate here each of the secondary dominants, its realizations. But when Chopin writes in the fourth bar, oops, I made a mistake. He purposely plays them staccato and fast, and mesmerizes you, and you go, oh, am I getting dizzy? That's the idea. Before the coda. And you think Chopin, harmonic. Brahms, harmonic. Liszt, harmonic. In the sense chordal, in the sense polyphonic, more or less or more, but often everywhere. When you play a single voice instrument, you need the others to combine. You cannot play a quartet on the viola by yourself, or the violin 1 or 2. On the piano you can play a quartet. But because you play them together with one brain, very often you verticalize them, as I said. But if you hear them, you're bewildered, you're amazed, you're enthused by the beauty of the inner voices, and you think, oh my God, why did he take such care for something nobody hears? It's a feeling, literally feeling, not feeling, of the harmonic progression, because you hear mostly the melody and perhaps the bass notes, and you think, when you look at the score, my God, is incredibly inspired, even for the things that are not noticed, heard, but they're there. The nobility of it is to be beautiful everywhere, but not show it and not display it, but find the best way to express by the gestural eloquence of each line, be it common tones, middle note. In orchestrations, you hear it more because it's colorized by the timbres of the instruments. On the piano, it's less because the piano sounds like a piano for all the voices. So you can do shadows and lights, but you cannot do oboe and clarinet unless you play a synthesizer. And even so, it's not as natural as the breathing and the vibrato and how much and when you blossom it before you close the phrase. I mean, it's to do with each voice when it's played individually in a group of musicians, or yourself, you play the group of musicians, but then you follow each of them, like the two viola D major Mozart quintet. And in minor, in the ending of the introduction. With the Neapolitan, darkening the harmonic feeling, and a diminished seventh to return to the 6/4. And adding the dominant seventh in the bass, and not the art of combining, layering, delaying, bringing, surprising where it appears. Oh, it sounds again so evident. What's dominant in D major? It's not like nuclear science, which is true actually. It's not. It's just incredibly beautiful honesty, earnestness in every voice leading. And when he does in the 4-2-1 quartet development, and he tries to go dramatic with the dissonances by doing canons on semitones. Provoked dissonances for releases. That's what I'm saying. You climb into his hearing that created through these dissonances a sense of despair, of hope, of delay, and then you play it with the trills and it becomes, but each part individually is the theme. But you hear and then the cello. And you can surrender and say it's only a progression of chords vertically. But how? These suspensions, appoggiaturas, trills, attack dissonances like minor nines, tension releases, delay releases of the tensions. That's why I think it's so crucial, really, to practice keyboard harmony for a pianist. Not instead of the fingering techniques, but on top or at the same time. Or if not at the same time, in a way that you can figure out to complement them in your hearing, thinking, performing of the piece when you conduct yourself as a conductor of your own symphony orchestra fingers. So you know where you're going, through where you're going, in what modulation, to which degree, with what type of comment tone, or not, or how surprising or how expressive, emotional, driven for by itself for what it is and for what it means to us musically, because we are emotional human beings and it means something beyond the patterns of usage. Because if not, it'll be just a series of tricks on a pattern of patterns where you have to go through obstacles. That's not only that. I think it's important to go into the detail and rebuild it again and play it as a whole and accept it for what it produces on us psychologically, emotionally, intellectually, be it. It's not because we know how it's made that we feel it better. It's just because we're curious. We want to know how it is made, because in the first place, it makes us feel so emotional if we are sensitive to tones and their organization and how they're organized for each composer, etc., etc. You can do that with painting, with literature, with a chosen word compared to the other, the innuendo and the purposely untold, something that is becoming obsessive in the text, and you understand how the character moves to another dimension. Don't recognize it always in the film adaptation, because somebody has to make choices. Whenever the choice of the writer is to describe as well as the action as well as the mood. So harmony is mood, action could be the virtuosity, and then combined you have singing. And the pianist is in fact a multitask artist. You're an orchestra, quartet, an SATB choir, regardless, or rather regarding which sections of which piece you play. Like in the Liszt Sonata, you have this redemption chorale. You have 1, 4, 5, 1 with the displayed SATB position. So you recognize it, even if it's clothed, dressed, and shaped in a way that you think it comes out of a daydreamed, beautiful place where it's just, I want to be there in escapism forever. Classical music often appears to non-classical musicians. Oh, you play that because you're in an escapism. So what? Yes. Let's escape and stay in that escapism. Taste the fruits of the combinations of the composer's musical thoughts through notation, comes alive with the emotion that it triggers for us. Of course, it's difficult to practice emotionally a scale. Therefore, emotionally a pattern of chordal progression with voice leading, compared to when you play it in Chopin. If you play but it's there. Call it skeleton, call it inner lining, call it soul. And then you have the dressing around the seductive patterns of melodic line, leaps or dissonances, or consonances or chromaticisms and all. Of course, if you play in a quartet, the second violin, you play the accompaniment of the harmonization. When you play violin, you play the melody. But all of them contribute. And mistake me not, I'm not interested in suggesting you should play it as a harmonic exercise in 4 parts. That would be reductive. But when you practice, it will help you. Because then you learn how the tracks move forward through the thought process of uninterrupted development of the voicing, of the harmonic progressions, of the voices, of the contrapuntal motions. And then you add the pianism on top of it when you play it, but you know where you are in real time all the time. So you shouldn't be even prone to have a memory mistake, since you're in constant fusion with the composer's thought process beyond the edition and the recordings of others. It becomes your piece. You move through this garden like a gardener who have harvested just that it was the composer who did. But you have to bring it back to life in front of an audience. Or you can solfege the score, they can read it by themselves, they don't need you to be their cantor, but you are on stage. And even if they're already preaching the convinced or those who discover it, nevertheless, you have to be expressing everything that you hear and hierarchize it in your interpretation, or saying, I cannot bring out all of everything everywhere because then it becomes unlistenable and people don't know what to listen to. So you have to make on the piano choices of shades and lights and textures. And you can hear like the second section of Fauré's Sixth Nocturne, the melody, legato, very legato. The second voice in the bottom of the like viola alto, if you want, playing syncopations, constantly off the beat, legato. Whenever the harmony is played by the cello or bass with the tenor or viola, interrupted in the left hand and connected in the bottom part of the right hand. You don't have. So you have layered pacings, you have breathings, you have connections. You hear some connect. So you have to be very careful with the pedal not to combine them. Is that bass line so beautiful, meaningful to overwhelm the right hand? No. But it should be there. Just like... I deeply believe that that is what pianists should do, is practice scales to equalize and individualize the independence of the fingers that don't come at birth with the cabling of the hand with the tendons. And then also their minds understanding for a certain repertoire, which, as I said, is at least a 3 century of Western music until the early 20th, where you navigate through composers who use the harmonic language, regardless of how much is customized and representing their style or their time period in their style. Some being ahead, some being old. They accused Brahms of writing Beethoven's 10th Symphony when they wrote the review for his first. So Rachmaninoff also, you could say, my God, he should have been told the tonality now is on. But he never gave into it because it didn't correspond to the idiom of what he had to express. And Schubert neither more than Mozart or Haydn or... But I respect so much those who decide that no, enough is enough. I'll break the rule and the system because this rule doesn't apply to me. I want to create my own organization, my own alphabet, my own language, my own grammars, my own diphthongs. So if you want to read my book, you have to learn my language. And each composer has its own language. And if you don't, you go, I don't understand, or it sounds random, or I don't get it. Because the phonemes are not just beautiful sounds, they're also meaningful sounds. That's the whole purpose of language, is to translate a meaning through concepts, which is very abstract thinking, let less when you adjust it with analogies, but that's like full circle. It's a fascinating fact that it's not just sounds for the sake of sounds, it's how you organize them among themselves, exactly as the harmonic progressions in the tonality and the voices in a well-organized society where they avoid collisions. The purposeful research to extract harmony, meaning organization, harmonic organization of the elements. That's what harmony is. It's not just a genre, a style. It's an idea, an ideal, something towards which you tend to go, to organize nature with humans, industry with nature, harmonious living, harmonious, respectful combination of plants, animals, humans, nature, and how we belong or extract from it, or we misuse it, or whatever. But the fact is that keyboard harmony helps the pianist comprehend a lot about the grammar embedded in the incredible inspiration of the piece which you play in the first place, not because of the grammar of it, of course, but because of what it means to you. And it becomes beyond escapism, a passion. You want to be in this country, in that place 24/7, because that's what you think, you feel your yearning soul belongs to. And if you don't, then it's fine, you don't have to force yourself. But non-classical musicians don't always understand why classical musicians, practicing students especially, can devote so much time to something so repetitive. And I think they respect it while they don't understand it. Well, I hope at least they do. But if it is applied rather to visual arts or to mathematics as a science or chess as a game, I think all these beauties of the brain, of the mind, that go through the sensual and emotional and spiritual all together, not separate. Elevation, it makes us better human beings with the added value of our education, but also of our sensitive intelligence. Basically, generosity. And how generous those composers were with us to leave us those few notes on the score that come alive under our fingers to our bewilderment, our excitement, our marvelment, and then how we translate it more or less well, and we're frustrated when it doesn't go well, because we love it so much, and we want to serve it so well, and we want to know it so well. And for pianists, I think it should be both harmonic and fingers. Thank you.